Hi there, Ben Fraser here from Creeping Tide. I just thought I would walk you through how I use Logic to create punk music without a band or any live musicians. Here we have a single Logic project, which has the entirety of what's going to be the second Creeping Tide album. I'm going to focus today on the track called Hold On Tight that came out last Friday, the 1st of September. So I will talk you through the track channel by channel. Let's get a bit of an overview here. So vocals in yellow, drums in purple, bass in blue, guitar in green, transitions in orange. Let's start with the drums. Let's just create a nice little loop here. So the drums here, the MIDI is on a folder track. And then within the folder track, I've got a load of stuff. I really like working like that. The MIDI's on the folder track and it propagates to every track within there so that every track within there is picking up the same MIDI. It's a really quick way to work. Now, most of the drums are coming from this fella here, Steve Slate Drums 5. Brilliant tool. Let me just show you in the browser what that looks like. It's this, Stephen Slate Drums. There's a free version, which is pretty cool. I paid for the full version. So within there, I've chosen one of the kits. Can't remember which one. I've tweaked it a little bit. And what I've got done is then worked it so that kit comes out of different channels in Logic. That means I then have the overheads on one channel. I like doing that because it means I can put Logic stock plugins and control the volume of everything separately. Got the kick, snare, hi-hats, ride, toms, crashes. You see the overheads in the room is doing quite a lot of work there. Got channel EQ and compression on the room, EQ on the kick, exciter, and a few other bits and bobs on the snare, some channel EQ on everything. So those are the basic drums. Then over the top of that, I've got some extra layers. I know you can do the layers in the Steve Slate drums, but I prefer doing the extra layers in Logic. I feel it gives me more control. On this channel, I've got a wide snare drum. So X for extra, snare wide. It's just a snare that I've taken from I can't remember where, and I've put it in a Logic sampler. And that's all that track is doing. Let's have a listen. It's quite a fat, bassy snare. I've got some reverb from Valhalla Plate. All the reverb I use is from the same plugin. Compressor, sample delay, that's giving it a nice bit of width. And a few other bits. Then another extra snare. This is actually the snare from the first Creeping Tide album itself, a whole variety of snares layered up and EQ'd together. Bit of EQ on there as well. And yet another snare. Really nice, kind of snappy snare. That's got some reverb coming from bus 10. So bus 10 is another Valhalla Plate reverb with a kind of short decay. Bus 6 over here is my drums parallel compression track. I'll come onto that in a bit. So let's hear all the snares together. So you can see that without those extra snares, the Steve Slate snare sounds great, but it sounds better with all those extra layers. And then I do the same with the kick. So the kick coming from Steve Slate sounds fine with some EQ. Made it sound way less boxy by removing some of those low mids and mids. But then I've got an extra kick. So I've got what called a high kick. That's from a Logic sampler, I believe. That's a kind of hard dance kick that I use it probably from some of the electronic music I do, but with all low frequencies taken out up to 3000 hertz, which leaves me with that. And then I've got the opposite. I've got a subby kick. I believe this is the kick from the first Creeping Tide album, which has got a really nice sub to it. Again, that's probably some layered up kicks from wherever. And I've done the opposite. I've cut everything out down to 228 hertz and boosted 60 hertz. So that means I've got control over the really high clicky bit of the kick and the really subby bit of the kick separately. And those kind of compensate for the just very live and slightly boxy kick from Steve Slate. And all those things add up to the kind of core of the drums, because kick and the snare is really the absolute core of any drum beat. And then one final little thing, which is here. So that is a bit of white noise. It's almost like a hi-hat on the sampler with, again, everything cut out up to 2,500 hertz. And that is actually playing at the same place as the kick and the snare. And it just gives both those things just that extra little bit of definition, especially when everything else is playing. Let's hear it all together. Very subtle, but it really makes a difference on the overall mix. I got that from producers do that in trance music. They have a kick hat. So it's like a little hi-hat you put on top of the kick that helps the kick stick through in the mix. So those are all the drums. Let's hear all the drums together. On top of that, overall, the drums have some compression from the Logic stock plugin compressor. I have got the fat effects. I'm very fond of fat effects. And all that is doing is, I'm trying to remember, a little bit of compression and a little bit of distortion. Some EQ, some more EQ, and all of that is going to bus 15, which is the rear bus. I'll come on to that later. And so, as I mentioned before, some of the individual channels are going to bus 6, and bus 6 are all my buses over here like in the aux group or the aux folder, and the drums parallel. Let's hear it on its own is doing this. You're not going to hear it without. So that has got more fat effects on, loads of compression, and quite a lot of distortion, a lot more distortion. It's got a bit of reverb on it and a bit of EQ. So that is a kind of, it's trying to make it trying to give a really compressed and live sounding bit of parallel compression that's just kind of working alongside the rest of the drums and giving them a bit of glue. It's pretty subtle. In terms of the actual MIDI notation, I actually just write all this in with the Logic pencil tool. I'm a drummer. I could play this, but I find it easier to just, I know from my head what I would play and I put it in. If I had an electronic drum kit, I might well use that. In an ideal world, I would play the drums on a beautiful drum kit in a beautiful studio with a load of beautiful mics and a great engineer to record it all, but I don't have that luxury. And for me, I love doing it this way because I get the same result, possibly a little bit more artificial, but with a lot of control very quickly. So as a drummer, I find it very satisfying. And this is literally what I'd play. And I really try and go into the detail of doing things like, that is a foot pedal, which is played alongside the crash, because that's what I do as a drummer. You probably can't hear it, but that's what I do as a drummer, making sure that crashes drop out when there's a snare drum roll and all that kind of stuff. And what the Steve Slate drums is great for is open and closed hi-hats. So you can hear in the verse, all those different levels of closed to fully open hi-hat. Great for the control. I love how they're on different, on actual different notes. So you can just kind of open up at the end of a verse really easily. Those are the drums. Secondly, bass. So again, we have a folder track with the MIDI in. Let's look at the MIDI first this time. Again, the MIDI is played in with the Logic pencil tool. I can play some bass. I'm not a great bass player, but I know enough bass to be able to imagine what I would play if I was a good bass player. Quite simple. But yeah, that's what I'd play if I was a better bass player. And again, if I had access to a great bass amp, great mics, and so on. But again, a lot easier this way. In terms of the notation, it's basically playing the root notes with a few extra notes here and there and some little twiddles, for want of a better word, like this. And all those kind of twiddles, I used to play along to a lot of Rancid when I learned to play the bass, and it's the kind of stuff that Matt Freeman would do, although obviously loads better than it's done here. So where's the bass coming from? The bass is coming from this here. So it's coming from Shreddage Precision Free. Now let's go into the browser to see what that is. It's this by Impact Soundworks. This is actually a free tool. It's the free version of Shreddage 3 Precision, the paid version. And interestingly, I prefer the free version. So it's a contact instrument. I think this is just as it comes out of the box. I haven't even gone for one of the presets, which starts adding a bit of like a cab sound and EQ and stuff to it. I'm relying on Logic's plugins to do that. So let's see how it sounds without any of these effects. Doesn't sound great. So what have I got now? I've got channel EQ, cutting all the subs out, bass amp. This is a Logic bass amp. I think it's bass free. It's one of the presets that I've tweaked a bit. Overdrive. That's crucial. It's just giving that extra bit of bite. Exciter. Lifting those kind of mid frequencies so the bass really sticks through in the mix. A Waves plugin. So this is a Waves plugin that replicates an old EQ channel strip, and that is simply boosting 700 hertz again. So that's doing a similar job to the Exciter, really, just boosting that even more. A bit more EQ, cutting out the subs again and boosting the kind of low bassy mids, 160 hertz, giving it a little bit more woomph. Again, that's not really doing much. And a final level of EQ, cutting out a few more frequencies. You might wonder why I've got the channel EQ over and over again. Generally, the early ones are basically getting the sound right. The later ones are helping the mix. And I like doing that in different stages because they're doing slightly different jobs. So that's that. That's the main layer of bass. Below that, there's a second layer of bass that is playing the sub-E frequencies only. So it's coming from the exact same MIDI, and this is actually Silent, which is by Leonard Digital. It's used a lot in electronic music, if you're not familiar with it. And this is a very simple single voice, sawtooth waveform with a cutoff down. It's very, very basic sound, as you can hear. But on there, bit of compression. EQ to cut out everything below, cut out everything above 121 hertz, and then boosting the real subby bass as well. And then this tool here, which is very cool, Track Spacer. Let's see it in the browser. Track Spacer is this thing here by Waves Factory. It's basically a sidechain compressor, but better. So that is listening to the kick drum. Whenever there's a kick drum, it is cutting the volume by 19.3%. So it just means the sub bass is just dipping to let the kick come through. So the two are working together really nicely, but subtly. I just find this slightly clearer and easier to use than using sidechain compression, but it's exactly the same concept. But that is only on the sub bass because the high bass isn't really getting in the way of those subby energetic frequencies and therefore doesn't need to dip. So that's the bass altogether. Have I got anything on the bass overall? Just a bit of overall EQ, and there's nothing in terms of parallel compression or rear bus on the bass. And I always been really happy with the sound I got from the bass for this. It was one of the first things I got for this album. First thing I defined, and it's hardly changed because I've just... It's a sound I'm really happy with. Right. Moving on to the guitars. So the guitars, again, there is... So this is a track stack which has got all the guitars in. That is literally just so I can open and close them like that, because as you can see, there's a lot going on in the guitars. And within that, there are some folder tracks, which again are doing that thing of having all the MIDI propagating to a load of different channels within it. So let's focus first on these strum guitars, which are basically the rhythm guitars. So in places, I've got a single lot of MIDI, which is propagating to all 5 tracks within there. And in places, they all do slightly different things. Let's look at this place here where they're all doing the same thing. So this is the MIDI. Let's actually look at the different tracks first. So let's look at strum left, so rhythm left. So this is coming from another contact instrument. And this time it's coming from Shreddage Legacy, which is this tool here, again by Impact Soundworks. I would not be able to do this project of actually creating live sounding music in Logic without real musicians, live musicians, without this tool. So this is a very cool tool that they've put together that has sampled real guitar on every conceivable note and then has all these parameters that you can play about with. So on here, I'm playing simple power chords. And this is a preset called Legacy All Round Rhythm. I think I may have messed around a little bit with these different. So you've got Van 51, which is like a cab emulation. I may have tweaked this a bit. I can't remember. But crucially, that is just coming back to, that is just doing a single track, and it's panned all the way over to the left. And it's just got a bit of EQ on it, cutting out some of the harsher, higher frequencies. We then have almost exactly the same setting, but with a lot less distortion. And the reason I do that is that during choruses and in sections with kind of main lead guitar, in the main sections, I have both playing, because the clean channel just gives the more distorted channel just that little bit of extra bite and almost kind of strumming sound. And I like to have control over both. But as you can see here in these verse sections where there's palm muting happening, I don't have the extra less distorted channel, because it starts just sounding too bright and a bit harsh even. So I love having that control, which is why they're on different channels. And a lot of this is how I work. It's just working from first principles. There's nothing clever going on. It's just working into the detail, so you have full control. We then have a separate rhythm guitar working on the right channel. So this is similar preset. Again, just a single track, so it's not multi-tracked. And I believe this one is more distorted than the left-hand one. So the left one is a similar preset, less distorted. The right one is more distorted. And that is a technique I picked up from seeing how Green Day produce their albums. They always have 2 different guitar sounds, one more distorted, one less distorted. They're still both pretty distorted, but one's kind of almost getting a bit metally and one is more kind of rock. And the 2 together give you a great tone, which has the best of both worlds. And again, a far less distorted version over the top. So those 4 together gives me the basis for the guitar tone. And then this was a pretty late addition. I have just got an extra little layer. That is again Shreddage 3 Legacy, different preset. This time it's Legacy All Round Rhythm. Is it a different preset? Seems to be a similar preset, but I've tweaked the settings in the console, on the cab, and so on. And this one is just playing a single channel, and it's panned in the middle, and it is multi-tracked. Gives you that immediate width. Sometimes I do the multi-tracking left and right myself to have more control. It's a bit of both, really. And that extra layer is just to give it more warmth. I just felt it needed more warmth in the low mids, and I found it easier to add an extra layer. I guess it's the same as an engineer adding an extra mic or an extra cab on a guitarist and recording that separately and kind of layering it in. The guitars don't end there. On top of that, I got an extra few layers just to really finish off that guitar tone. I've got these. Oh, we didn't look at the MIDI. Let's look at the MIDI. So the MIDI for this is like this. So down here we have simple power chords, just on 3 strings each one. And then crucially, this is the way that these contact instruments work. There's an up and a down stroke. So within that single power chord, these are the up and down notes. And that is really crucial. And it's a great tool because for this kind of punk music, you really want the sound of the strumming to come through. And that's where a lot of the energy comes through. So I've had to pay a lot of attention of kind of listening to how punk rhythm guitar works and trying to replicate that through MIDI. You can see there's certain strokes that are almost omitted, and that really almost missing out a certain strum or yeah, really helps give that kind of energy and drive. So yeah, on top of that, we have an extra layer of guitar here. These are actually stock Logic samples from a long time ago that I don't think they come with Logic anymore, but they used to. They are simply power chords, as you can see. And I've just got these kind of open power chords with a load of, let's see what happens if I remove all these. Yeah, so they're just clean power chords, but very well recorded, as you would expect. Got a guitar amp over it, some EQ and a few other bits. They, again, playing just in choruses and main sections. They just give everything a little bit more warmth. And an extra layer of Shreddage 3 Legacy. This is Legacy Brit Power Lead preset. Again, I've tweaked the cabs a little bit. This is multi-tracked. And crucially with the EQ, I'm cutting a lot of the low and the low mids. And I just felt that when you go from a verse to a chorus and bring this layer in, it really just boosts the sound. So it's just like an extra layer of live guitar. This layer of guitar has a track spacer on it that is listening to the lead guitars. So it's dropping a little bit to leave room for the lead guitars, which we will listen to now. So the lead guitars, again, are coming from Shreddage 3 Legacy. The preset is called Legacy Brit Power Lead this time. So without the extra, I've got some EQ on it, brightening up a little bit, tape delay, so that's a dual mono, only on the right. It gives it a nice bit of width by only delaying on the right-hand channel. Great technique. This delay, I think, isn't doing anything, but it gets automated in at places. And then there's a gain, which isn't doing very much. And then we got the same reverb, a lot of reverb, which is the same reverb we saw before. It's the Valhalla plate reverb with the short decay. So a lot of things are being being sent on a bus to that. And this is the lead guitar. We want loads of delay, loads of reverb. Let's listen to where it's a bit more solo-y. I've kept it really simple. I tend to start these little guitar riffs on the guitar. I can play a bit of guitar. I have a guitar. I'm not very good at it, but I can play enough to get a sense of what I want. And with punk music, these kind of melodies and leads are always really, really simple. They're almost better when they're simple. So for me, it's almost helps not being a very good guitarist because you have to keep it simple. It's not about doing anything fancy. Crucially, though, we see down here in the MIDI automation, we've got modulation automated in, which goes to the tremolo in contact. So that's just how it comes out the box, and crucially some pitch bend. So let's just listen to what that's doing. Yeah, I've automated the delay. So with all that reverb and delay, it just removes the slight machine-like effect you get from the fact it's all MIDI, and it really all comes together. So those guitars, probably that's where most of the work has been done, getting a great guitar sound. I've used a lot of the tracks from American Idiot, the American Idiot album by Green Day, to try to get the guitar tone right. Whether you like that album or not, it is an amazing sounding punk album. And the guitar tone on it is just out of this world. So I've tried to aim for that. I obviously haven't quite got there. See, I thought this track retrospectively sounded a bit social distortion-y. So I did a bit of referencing. You can see down here with a couple of social distortion tracks that I felt had a similar kind of vibe, though it was not intentional to be so social distortion-y, but I am a big fan. So that's just how it came out. Crucially, there's places where these rhythm guitars are all playing the same thing, but there's places where they don't. So let's look at the verse. Again, these contact instruments, so Shredder's Legacy is amazing for the palm muting. So the palm muting, simply, where are we? Here we are. So for the palm muting, just power chords. When I'm doing the emphasized non-palm muted notes, you can see I'm doing 3 strings. When they're palm muting, I generally just do 2. And essentially, the lower the velocity, the more muted the sound is. And I think when it goes above 60 velocity, it becomes unpalm muted or open. And because of that, you can just do these really very, very live sounding effects on the guitar. Let's just see the whole verse. You can see there it's the palm mute being less muted. Then into the verse. And essentially, whenever I've got a different track here, they all have slightly different patterns. So look at the pattern here versus here, and same in the opening section. So you can see here, that's the strumming pattern, varies a little bit between the different tracks. And that's how you get that really live sounding effect of essentially different guitarists playing the same thing slightly differently. So it's nothing complicated. It's just about going into the detail and making sure that rhythm is ever so slightly different on both sides. Some other things I forgot on the lead guitar. I've got Logic's stock MIDI plugin called the randomizer on the velocity. I love doing that because instead of going into the MIDI and using the functions here and MIDI transform to to create random changes in the velocity to make it sound more human, you can do it with a plugin. And that means, if you go through that the MIDI transform and change it and then decide you've changed it too much, it's a bit of a pain to change it back. When with here, it's a single dial that changes everything. I've only got that on the lead guitars, but it's just helping give those lead guitars a bit more of a human sound. I finished the guitars off down here with some live guitar samples from a punk sample pack. I cannot remember the name. I will make sure I put a link in the description. I bought these. I think they cost £20, $20, and they have a load of swells and a load of feedback on different notes. And I just bring those in places like here. It's very subtle, but it really helps things sound live. And on top of that, final thing for the guitars are pick scrapes. I've got one pick scrape on the left, a different pick scrape on the right. These were part of the Logic guitar samples that came with an old version of Logic. They're not there anymore, but I've kept them. So different one on the left and right. And what it means is not always, but sometimes I will only put the right-hand one and make sure there's a kind of gap in the rhythm guitars, so it sounds like it's the same guitarist doing them. I think these shredded instruments do actually have pick scrapes in them, but I can't remember if I didn't like them or I found it awkward doing the automation to actually get them out. So I just found it easy to have these samples. So those are the guitars. As I say, there's a lot of layers going on. Down here, we've got some other guitars which are less distorted, which I use for some of the skankier ska tracks and so on, but that's not this track here. So those are the guitars. Final layers down here, transitions. I've got what I call an inverb. It's a kind of, yeah, it's basically a hand clap with a lot of reverb and a lot of distortion, but with loads of the bass cut out of it. And I've got an extra crash. And just at the beginning of phrases, I put those things in. You can hardly hear it, but it just helps emphasize that first beat. It's really very, very subtle. I played about with having more transitions, which I know you get a lot of in the kind of more produced pop punk, but I felt it was starting to sound overproduced and less live. And really, what I was trying to do here was to keep that kind of sound and energy of a live punk band rather than go overproduced, although by very nature it's overproduced because it isn't a live band. Right, final thing, vocals. So I've sang all the vocals myself with this microphone here. It's an Audio-Technica mic that costs about £100 or $100. It is a USB condenser mic. It doesn't need phantom power because it's USB, which I like. And I like that it's USB because you just plug it in. You don't have to rely on your sound card or anything. So, again, a lot of layering with the vocals. They're all in a track stack just so I can collapse them all. Then within that track stack, there's a lot of folder tracks. One of them here is the main lead vocals. So there is a single folder track with all the effects on. And then within there is 6 or 7 individual tracks. Those basically have nothing on them other than a limiter. And that's just so I can move vocals around and I know they're going to have the same sound without having to duplicate all the plugins and so on. It's just a workflow thing. So the lead vocals, when I record the vocals, I tend to sing a verse or a chorus at a time, and I just sing it over and over and over again. And then I take the best take. I've tried going down the road of chopping up all the different words. I'm patient, but not that patient. And again, because this is trying to sound live, I like the idea of trying to keep, a verse or a chorus at a time and really get that live, quite raw energy from the vocals. And the vocals have absolutely zero pitch correction. I'm fully aware they probably drastically need them. The vocals are quite flat, but again, I was trying to compensate for it not being live by keeping a really raw energy in the vocals. So let's hear what the vocals are doing. So if I go onto the lead vocals, solo them, and remove all these plugins.
We will all lose it all, loved ones and our minds. Precious thoughts, tender moments lost in time. We will all...
So they're a bit rough. What have I put on there? I put a load of stuff. Channel EQ, cutting out the low and dipping some of the unpleasant mids. Vocal Rider, that's a wave plugin that does a nice job of just flattening out the volume. You might rely on compression to do that, but yeah, Vocal Riders.
We will all lose it all, loved ones and our minds.
I'm not doing it very much. It's yeah. De-esser, so that removes the sibilant harsh frequencies on S's and T's and so on. This is a classic CLA compressor emulator from Wave Plugins, which is doing a lot of heavy compression
Ones and our minds,
and helps to start giving that kind of a bit of almost analog distortion. I got a lot of these Wave plugin settings from this here. This is a very cool video on Pure Mix, which is Andrew Sheps talking through how he did the mix for Green Day's Bang Bang, which is an amazing, that Revolution Radio album sounds great. Not quite as good as American Idiot, but it does sound absolutely incredible. And this is an amazing video that I paid for, where you see Andrew talk through all the digital only plugins that he's used to get that mix. So actually a lot of plugins and indeed the settings I got from that, including this.
All lose it all, loved ones and our minds.
Another Waves plugin. This is an analog tape emulator.
We will all lose it all, loved ones.
I don't quite know what it's doing, but it gives it a certain analog, subtle, distorted magic. I really feel there's so many plugins out there that claim to add some kind of magical sound to things. I think this is the only one on vocals that I've kind of heard actually do that.
We will all lose it all, loved ones and our minds.
Just a very subtle analog distortion. Great, or analog sounding distortion. More EQ. Again, this is the same idea as I mentioned before. The early EQs are to get the tone right. The later EQs are to help with the mix. So cutting this 2.5K was to help get rid of a bit of harshness, a bit of warmth down here. Another de-esser. I read that somewhere. It's good to have one early and later. The early ones get rid of the initial harsh sibilant frequencies, but those frequencies may have come back out through compression and so on. Another bit of a magic vocal plugin is Chris Lord Algae CLA vocals. Again, I got that from this Andrew Shep's video, and I almost copied. I remember pausing a video, copying all the settings, and then just changing them slightly. So this is giving me some extra top, some extra kind of high frequencies for that extra shine on the vocals, a bit of reverb, some slap delay. So slap delay is a very, very short delay that gets used on vocals a lot.
We will all lose it all, loved one.
It's quite magical what that does. More EQ, cutting more harsh frequencies, some tape delay, which is actually down there. But what I often do is in some tracks, I don't use it at all. In other tracks, I use it throughout. And in this track, I use it only in the chorus. So you can see verses 0% wet signal and then 16% delay in the choruses.
Way too fast, memory shattered. Hold on, it's all we have.
Subtle, but quite effective. More EQ, cutting out more high frequencies. A limiter, I think at points it was just peaking a bit, so just controlling that. And finally, I have originally I was using the same Valhalla plate short decay reverb I've used on nearly everything else, but here I felt it needed a bit more control. So it's actually the same initial Valhalla plate setting, but it's compressed and it's got a load of like some fat effects doing a bit of distortion, some track spacer, which is listening. What's it listening to?
Yeah, hold on tight, enjoy the ride, eyes open.
Bus 21. I can't remember what it's listening to. Let's see what bus 21 is. It's going to be over here somewhere. Bus 21. Where are you? Bus 21 is the rear bus. Okay, interesting. So that when the rear bus is loud, it's cutting down the reverb on the vocals just to make a bit of room. That make a difference? I'm not sure. And then finally some EQ to cut out all the low mids and all the high frequencies.
Eyes open wide.
So that quite a lot of that reverb. Those are the lead vocals. You can also see I'm using the gainer here, which I'm automating because I often just add 1 dB in the choruses. I felt sometimes the lead vocals get a bit lost. Instead of relying on some fancy effects, you just boost it by 1 dB. I use the gain tool to do that because then I can still change the volume freely on here without worrying about being automated back. So those are the main lead vocals. I then have some doubles. So again, I have a folder track for the doubles with 3 layers, 3 tracks of doubles, 1 in the middle, 1 pan to the left, 1 pan to the right. The doubles have almost the exact same effects chain as the lead vocals, but I'm cutting out more bass frequencies to make them a little bit thinner. You can see here, cutting out up to 150 hertz. And I'm not boosting anything. So let's just hear that. So in the verse here, there's just a left and a right.
Lost in time.
These are very distorted, these doubles. I really like that sound.
Lost.
And I use it to emphasize certain sections in verses and then to kind of thicken out the lead vocals in choruses.
Precious thoughts, tender moments lost in time. We will all lose shattered. Hold on, it's all we have. Hold on on tight, enjoy the ride, eyes open wide.
And because it's me singing them all, you get that lovely kind of slightly flangy, phasey sound from it all being the same vocalist. In terms of controlling those, with the doubles, I spend quite a bit of time aligning them. I obviously sing them as precisely as I can, but I then align them. Again, there is no pitch correction, but I feel like those doubles need to be really tightly timed with the main vocals to get that real, almost that kind of flangy kind of effect you get. That's the doubles. And then finally, I have the actual backing vocals. So the backing vocals you'll see here, I have lots and lots of channels of those. So again, a folder track, similar effect chain to the lead vocals, less distorted, less compressed, and more low frequencies cut out. Lots of reverb, but this time it's not the vocal reverb on the bus, it's just the regular Valhalla plate. And essentially with those backing vocals, I have one channel pan left a bit, panned right a bit, pan left some more, pan right some more, pan left all the way, pan right all the way. I'm looking down here, by the way. Pan left all the way, pan right all the way, and so on. And I've got 12 channels. I don't always use the full 12, but there you go. And as I say, generally, for a chorus in particular, I will just loop the chorus and sing it over and over and over again. So they get packed up into takes. I'll then listen to the takes quickly. The best take goes to the lead vocals. The next best takes go into the doubles, and the less good ones go into the backing vocals. And some of the backing vocal takes are often terrible, but I quite like that. Again, it's punk. It needs to be a bit rough, and that's how you're going to get that kind of gang vocal sound. See, that one's wobbling all over the shop. And these ones I do tidy up. You can see there's a few flex markers here. I do tidy up the positioning of them, the alignment of them, but not as precisely as the doubles. And that's because I want them obviously to be in time, but I also want them to be a bit loose, so it gives that kind of gang vocal effect. Again, zero pitch correction. And believe it or not, some harmonies. I don't have a musical enough here to sing a harmony out of the box just like that. So what I simply do, because it's all MIDI, I generally mute the guitars and just literally move the bass up as many semitones as I can hit, but making it a kind of a frequency that's going to work, or a note that's going to work from a harmonic perspective. In this case, I could go up 7 semitones, which works nicely from a harmony-wise. Sometimes I go down 2, sometimes I go up, whatever works. And all those layers of vocals come together, especially in the chorus here.
Hold on, it's all we have. Hold on tight, enjoy the ride, eyes open wide.
Okay, and all together,